Well, everybody is really in for a treat right now because this is literally the most unfiltered conversation I think we've ever had on Business of the V. It was a blast to speak to Dr. Levkoff about sexuality and sexual education. I can't wait to hear what she has to say.
And what's so exciting is she literally is in the front line. She's teaching in school. She's teaching kids as young as 8, 9, all the way through high school. She's involved in providing training and education for medical professionals who don't have the vocabulary. So it's literally her world is like a research lab, a real-time research lab. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting to hear her perspective on how things have changed, how they've stayed the same and how they've changed, and what an impact the phone and technology has had on kids kids and intimacy, which is not a
And
topic we talk about
adults,
a lot.
and adults for that matter. Also, her presence in the media really shed such a positive light because we know we're getting accurate information from someone who's really well trained in the sexual health space. And I think that's super important, especially for the young people that she's influencing. So let's speak with Dr. Logan Levkoff. Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so excited to have Logan Levkoff on the show today. Logan, in addition to being a friend and one of the funniest people I've ever met, is a very experienced sex ed researcher. She's had a stint as a TV star, and she is the person who asks the hard questions and starts the hard conversations. So we're really excited to jump in. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a treat.
So tell us a little bit about what your day is like in the world of a sexual health educator. Who is hiring you? Where are you going? What are you talking about? How do they find you? All of those things, because we've talked about this on the show many times, like the appalling lack of
Yeah.
curriculum in sex ed. 30 plus states require sexual education. Half of those don't require it to be clinically or medically accurate.
Probably have to start at the beginning, which is I have been in this field since I was 15 years old. When I came home from school one day and my parents had condoms and bananas on my dinner table, and they became super involved in HIV and AIDS fundraising and HIV awareness and education, despite seemingly not having any skin in the game, so to speak. It was that amazing and crazy blip in time when even if you had never talked to your kids about sexuality before, now there was something looming and it was real and it impacted everyone. And so thus the condoms and bananas. And they basically said to me, here's how you use a condom. And next week you go to peer training to become an educator for other people, for your whole high school and middle school. And at the time, I guess because I was just had enough of an ego and enough of a mouth that I was like, okay, I could do that. And so that's really how it started. I never really knew this could be a profession because who was doing this? I mean, do you remember anyone who was? There was no one.
Well, I was in vagina school, so I do remember some people doing this,
Okay,
but
yeah.
yes, you were definitely a
I'm Dr.
pioneer.
Ruth. We've
Well,
had
yeah,
a
I mean,
pretty
that's what it
big
was. I
gap.
mean, it was Ruth who was Dr. Ruth was certainly a pioneer. But there weren't many others. And when I went to my undergrad, we thought about who would be the relevant voice of a generation. The answer was, I don't know. And I just figured, well, maybe I'll figure out what that path looks like. So I actually, my first sex ed teaching job was to eighth grade girls at an all-girls school in Manhattan in the fall of 2000, because I can't remember if it was April or June of 2000, but the front page of the New York Times style section said, "The face of teenage sex grows younger." And it was all about teenage girls performing oral sex on the back of buses.
Yeah, I
And
remember the Rainbow Club, and we had
yeah,
to
The
explain
Rainbow
what
Club,
this
the
was.
lipstick
Yep.
parties.
and everyone was in a total panic and decided that now was the time to bring someone in to talk. And at the time, I was much younger. Probably wasn't even that much older than some of the girls and my students at the time. 10 years, maybe 10 years older. But that's how it started. And because I'm in New York City, in the independent school world, word spreads very fast that there's someone who is credible and can relate to young people. And that was the beginning.
I want you to share a little bit more, with the credibility piece about the education that you have
The
around
real
this. This
education.
wasn't
Yeah.
just you with an ego and, a willingness to speak.
Thank you. I keep forgetting that that's not a given these days, that people actually have some area of expertise. So I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania in English literature because
So totally a
everyone was
clear
going to go
path
into
to
that
this.
field. But what I thought I was going to go to law school, but what happened was I was watching and listening to my peers at Penn and women who were smart, like badass, fearless women make the worst decisions when it came to sex. The worst. And it wasn't like not using protection, bad decisions. It was no equity, it was no pleasure, it wasn't the relationship structure that we wanted. And I thought there has to be a better way. And at the time, to go back to our earlier conversation, we were thinking about who was going to speak to us. And we really couldn't find anyone. And so I started working with the peer sexual health group on campus, and I was writing an anonymous sex advice column in our paper long before anyone had one of these. It was called Ask Mistress Lola. And
Oh, goodness.
and people would write in. And
Wow,
then
who was in charge of your branding?
yeah. Well, the funny thing is that the image that they had was this like very Gloria Steinem looking person with these big glasses, which I thought was hysterical. And writing brace yourself for just to put this into context now. I was writing all of the sexual or sexuality pieces for our campus women's paper, okay, which was entitled Generation XX. Can you imagine? These days,
Amazing.
that would not happen. So I wound up doing all this work on campus and realizing for whatever reason I had a talent in talking about things that made people provocative. And Penn at the time had a master's and a PhD program in lots of different sexuality fields, education and therapy. And so I called my parents one day and said, okay, I'm not going to law school. I'm going to graduate early and I'm going to go to grad school in the world of sexuality. And they're like, great. To do what? And I said, I have no idea. No idea. But I wound up getting a master's and then eventually a PhD in human sexuality, marriage, and family life education.
Do you see any patients, or you're providing information for the masses, it sounds like?
Yeah, providing
Yeah.
information for the masses in lots of different ways. So yes, in classrooms, that's the bulk of my life and has
Yeah.
been for 30 years. Classrooms, faculty training, parent caregiver training about, how to have difficult conversations as it relates to sexuality or any subject these days for that matter. I've done a lot of media work. I did a lot of corporate consulting in the sexuality space. I spent a lot of years working with Trojan condoms, a lot.
Sure.
But yeah, not as a clinician, really as an educator with the and anytime someone says, "Are you a therapist?" I say, "No, I'm very much a tried and true educator."
I am just so curious because it seems like a person who really followed in your footsteps with probably not getting the education formally in sexuality is Alex Cooper. And her podcast was all about sex and really provocative, at least at the beginning. Do you see overlaps with what you are teaching or were teaching 4 or 5 years ago at the private schools? And I mean, that is really all out there and super provocative. Is it the same but different, or is it really like a different type of education at this point?
It's really a good question. It's funny because when I started in this field, I didn't think I was going to be an educator. I was doing my master's, and I really, really thought that I was going to be a therapist. I wanted to deal with big provocative issues, and I wanted to be in the
Yeah.
media. In fact, while I was in graduate school, when I was doing my master's, I wound up being on the Howard Stern show, much to the sheer horror of my classmates. They were so horrified by me completely. And so I have that,
Which, by the way, you love as an average day. If you haven't horrified somebody, you feel like you haven't even gotten out of bed.
that's true. I mean, so like the Alex Cooper model, the provocative conversation model is absolutely where my heart
Okay.
lies. But the one thing that I knew, and it was a different time. This was the, late 90s, early, 2000s. And
Yeah.
I was young, and I realized that at the time people were going to delegitimize me so much for being a young woman in the world of sexuality trying to make a name for herself, that having the formal education was critically important to me. I
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
wanted someone to say your voice and your opinion or your perspective doesn't matter because you're just some like dumb girl with no education. And so that's why I did it. Now there are a lot more voices and a lot of different strategies, and people know this person has this great platform, but maybe doesn't have formal education and maybe is relying on other, experts, and that's okay. So I think there's room for everyone. But I didn't really have that luxury back then because I needed to make sure people found me credible.
HIV education was a moment, it was a catalyzing moment in time where there was some, I'm not going to say unity, but some common belief that we needed to understand this,
Yeah.
whether or not it affected you directly or indirectly, or you were just a, person walking through the world learning about this. I don't mean to make it a totally loaded question, but we seem to be in quite a different place. And you've been educating for the
Yeah.
past 25 years. You referred to when you started, but it's not like you've been sitting on the sidelines for the past 25 years. You've been continuing to educate, and you're seeing, I imagine, changes in the kinds of questions you get, in the concerns that patients have. So what have you seen? Again, we're talking about 25 years, but are
Yeah.
there a couple areas where the shift in
Totally.
the conversation has been particularly dramatic?
Yes. Obviously, the conversations around gender, right? With the expansiveness of gender language, with not a day going by without there being something dramatic in our world pertaining to gender. Uh, those questions have changed. There is so much identity-based conversation. And I'm not saying that all of it is organic. Like I don't think that all of it is innate to young people. Like they're asking because they're concerned or curious about their own. I think they're asking because they hear all of these words and they're like, what the hell is anyone talking about?
Yeah.
So that,
Yeah.
that's a piece of it. And then of course, and this has always been there, but there was a lot more of it these days, which is these provocative concepts or words, or I'm going to say lifestyles, but I don't mean it because it's a provocative lifestyle, but it's the best word I could come up with in this moment. Things that people get from TikTok. So you're always going to have the people who are kids as well as teens asking questions about furries. That's not new. That conversation has been around for an old time, but the way in which they get information is so saturated with, you know, more extreme concepts that now they bring them to the classroom a lot earlier than they used to.
So I imagine that a lot of our listeners do not know what that term means. Is there a way that you can share a
Yeah.
definition of what that means without going to the extreme?
Yeah, I mean, so if you imagine people who get sexual and intimate fulfillment from dressing like a furry mascot, basically,
Like a
like
furry animal?
Yeah, it's a furry animal, like one of the mascots you see on one of the sports teams. But it's a very organized community, and
Yeah.
it's definitely sexual and sexualized. But for whatever reason, this word always comes up. Kids always want to know what it's about. Yeah.
It's funny because in my training day, which is a while back, of course, that was considered a fetish in the DSM
Yeah.
3, 4, or whatever version was present at the time. So I guess these things are just getting more normalized or just more spoken about, which is I don't know, how are you seeing that in your world?
I,
I
both.
mean, are kids raising their hands and saying, Dr. Levkoff, what is this? Or
Yes.
my
Yes.
boyfriend wants me to do this? Like, how is it being
Really, what
communicated?
is it? Or, oh, I heard so and so is a furry. And no matter how young they are, I'll say, oh, yeah? What does that word mean? Now, a lot of them know or have some close to close to accurate understanding. A lot obviously have no idea. And they think it's so much more popular than not. And again, that's because of TikTok and Instagram and Twitch and all the platforms that they're on
Yeah.
that show them these things all the time. So it kind of warps your understanding of how prevalent
Yeah.
something is.
Let's talk a little about TikTok and some of the other platforms, because in my gynecology world, some of the trends
Oh,
and influencer education, if you will, really interfere with practice. So, for example, oral contraception seems to be poison now because it will absolutely ruin your sexual drive. What say you?
oh, to my opinion on that information.
Yeah, I mean, these are young kids, high school and younger, mostly younger, who I see in practice. And for whatever reason, I bring up birth control pills as an option for something medically reasonable. Oh my God, no, I've been listening to TikTok. This is poisonous. It's going to
Yeah.
ruin my sex drive. Do you see this? And what's your response in an educational way?
So with younger groups, so my youngest students are typically 8, 9, right? And for the most part, we're talking about who are you sitting in a room and early
Yeah.
puberty stuff and anatomy and breaking down traditional stereotypes about gender, which I wish people would, instead of this alarmist crap we hear all the time, I wish someone would ask me what I do in a classroom with young people as it relates to gender. Because the one thing, even if you define what the word transgender is, the one thing they all want to talk about is the old pink blue model, why boys can't have long hair and girls can't be athletes, which obviously are all ridiculous, but those are the things they're still concerned about. They're not concerned about the other stuff. Like that's us as adults, like
They're at the basic level.
basic, totally basic. Now, as an educator, I can only speak for myself. I cannot speak for other educators, but I know what I do in a classroom and how I spend most of my time. In middle school and high school classes, I am still always talking about oral contraceptives as a really important tool in our not just contraceptive toolkit, but like sexual health and reproductive health management toolkit. And they can say to me 100 times over, but TikTok told me whatever. And I'm going
Yeah.
to say, I would like to know where your TikTok influencer got their medical degree from. And last time I checked, for decades, plural, people have been using oral contraceptives. And if there is one where you have a side effect you don't like, shockingly, you can actually talk to your medical provider and try a new one. It's very simple.
Imagine that.
So one of the things that's the most concerning about this part of the conversation, and Alyssa spends way more time educating her patients than
I'm
most
sure.
doctors
I
I've
have
ever
no
met,
doubt.
Thanks.
um, is that this hormones are bad, oral contraception is bad. All the analysis demonstrates that that trend was created by influencers, none of which, in this particular case, had any medical background. So this is, Sally, in her bedroom saying, this was my side effect. No one else should do this. So I'm particularly sensitized, even more so after doing the show with Alyssa for so long. The answer usually ends with speak to a medical professional.
Yeah.
But
Right.
this
A real
idea
one.
that this is now the gospel that if you ask, I believe, the average teenager or person in their late teens or early 20s, people who are still trying to figure it out and, figuring out what works best in the context of their fertility, all these things, they now think that oral contraception means bad. This is
Yeah.
not good. This is poison. And
I want
none of the medical professionals are saying that I speak to.
Well, I just have to chime in. I just wanted to understand what your view was based on, because you're on the pulse of what these young people are seeing on social media platforms. The truth of the matter is there are studies that do suggest some women have a lower libido on birth control pills or have a
Yes.
different attraction to their partner if they were on pills when they met them. And then when they come off, it's a little bit different. So there is some science to this, but I just wanted to understand the trends that you
Yeah.
have to debunk from social media. I mean, there are so many that I put down to ask you about, and
Yeah,
I will get to the menopause space because that's like a whole nother, can of worms. But the birth control pill and sexual function in the
yeah.
student
So
population really hit me.
I think that it, it's hard because some of it, it's easier for a young person to shut down the conversation about function and just assume everyone's going to have low libido. But there are side effects with everything. Like it's not
Yeah,
just oral contraceptives, and it's your personal history, and it's dosage, and none of us like get it perfectly the first time. There's there's
The
trial and
process.
error with all of
yeah,
these things, and I think young people are growing up in a world where things are it's the world of instant gratification, right? If it doesn't work
yeah,
for you immediately, it's over. It's the same concept with online dating, right? As great as online dating can be, you're just one swipe away from the next great one. We don't have to spend any time. I'm not sure this is perfect. I'm just going to move on. So I think it's very similar. I think it's very similar thinking. Also, it requires, if you were going to talk about function, if we're going to talk about pleasure, we have to be talking to medical professionals about function. And so many people, as you know better than anyone, don't want to do that. So instead,
yeah.
to avoid the conversation, we just avoid that contraceptive option. We just write it off because it
And
requires a conversation.
and it turns out, surprising to me, Alyssa is also an outlier here, that many providers don't want to talk about function or
Yeah.
enjoyment or satisfaction. So, we're sort of built this system on a house of cards.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done a lot of med school and resident training, and it's
Yeah.
amazing what people are very
Very little.
uncomfortable talking about. And my take on it is
Absolutely.
always, if you're looking to get a holistic view of someone's health, how is it that you avoid one section of their body? Like,
Yeah.
is it possible to get a real picture if everything from here to here and the mental part you just ignore? But obviously,
You
plenty of
know what?
people.
One of the biggest questions I get in my office, and this just applies to any age group, but it always applies to sex, is am I normal? What is normal? How many times a week or month do people have sex? What's normal? I get asked that all the time.
Yeah.
Of course, my answer is there really is no normal. It's what's normal for you, but I'd love to hear your take on that,
Yeah.
universal query.
So I always say when someone asks, what is the most common question you get asked? And I said, it's not about the what so much as that it always begins with, is it normal if, or am I normal if?
Yeah.
I have the same reaction. One, that there are things that are typical, right? Things that are more common, but it doesn't mean they're more normal, because that word normal automatically means that the opposite of that implies some judgment that it's wrong. And
Yeah.
it might not be typical. It doesn't make it wrong. So I keep trying to get people to remember that word really has never applied to the majority of things in the world of sexuality and relationships. And whatever works for you, whatever feels like the baseline, or in this case, we could say the norm, not normal, but the norm for you and your partnership or you on your own, great. If that is unsatisfying to you, then it's time to have a conversation, right? But who cares if you're having more or less sex of any variety than your best friend, than your sibling, than your neighbor? It doesn't make a difference, because everyone's partnerships and the things that they find meaningful and important are different.
Are
It's just,
different.
if something is not working the way you want it to, then we should deal with it.
Here's today's hot flash. 30 states and the District of Columbia require public schools to teach sex ed, 28 of which mandate both sex ed and HIV education. 22 states require that if provided, sex and or HIV education must be medically or factually accurate.
When I first
I would
started in the space, there was a question, what is the average time? And in this case, we were dealing with a product for heterosexual couples. What is the average amount of intimacy? And we were broader than not just male-female penetrative sex. What is the frequency of intimacy? And the answer was, at that time, and there was research to support this, this is years and years ago, once a week. And I would get two answers when I said that. That much? That little? You know, so it just sort of highlights how
Right.
nobody knows, because going back to your point, most people aren't educated enough or comfortable enough to either have that conversation. Girls talk about a lot of things with their friends, but there's areas they don't talk about. So I want to go to the whole thing, how much things have changed with the ubiquity of porn. We're seeing trends that show people are engaging in less intimacy,
Mhm.
however you want to describe that, for a number of reasons. One is they're looking at their phones. I mean, legitimately, the focus on the iPhone has interfered with intimate relationships. And then again, the ubiquity of porn, it's same as influencers. When there's a vacuum, you fill it up in some way. What are you seeing? And I'm also curious, Alyssa, for what you see come into your office. Has that shifted what people think, again, is the norm for them? Because we've been hearing a lot that now young boys see porn, and again, that's a very generalized statement, and that's what they think it should be. And that's how they think their partner should react.
Yeah. So a few things I've said for a long time, and I still stand by this. I am very concerned about the lack of intimacy that young people are having. Like super
Yeah.
concerned. There
And
are
describe what you mean when you say
Yes,
that.
I am concerned that they are not experimenting with their bodies on another person consensually as much as they should be in adolescence as they become an adult. So I think we forget that the hallmark of adolescence is understanding and expressing and exploring your sexuality. And the fact that we're shutting down this pipeline and substituting it with our phones, whatever that means, and we're not taking not just, I don't even mean like a physical risk, but not even the emotional risks, having in
Oh, yeah,
conversation.
there's no rejection with your phone. Your
Of
phone
course
is
not.
not, it's not going to run, well, it may run out of battery, but it's not going to run out of battery really. And it also is never going to provide any rejection.
Yeah,
So
you don't have to
that
be
is very
vulnerable.
frightening. Yeah, I
Totally.
mean, we see a general trend in the college age populations. I don't really see people younger than that in my office, but there are more people either not engaging, and I can only speak for the women I see, or waiting until they really find a right partner than I feel like ever before in my 30 years of practice. But that may just be a trend that I'm seeing in my own practice. What I really want to get to though is the whole menopause and perimenopausal group of women, because there's a lot of talk about
Hi, how you
sexual
doing?
function in this category. And testosterone is having a huge moment and potentially could even end up getting approved for women for at least sexual libido. We're talking about vaginal dryness and pain during intimacy, which is a really big deal that was kept hush hush for so long, which I'm sure people never were embarrassed to talk to you about.
And by the
But
way, in all fairness, affects some younger people too because of side
yeah,
effects of medications and a whole bunch of other
right.
things. But go ahead, continue.
Yeah. So do you cater to that population in terms of education as well? Because these are thirsty, thirsty women for information.
Yeah, not as much, but not for not purposefully. I mean, yes, in terms of conversations, if I'm called by someone to comment on a piece or a story, there used to be a lot. There used to be a lot more to those conversations, or many more of those conversations. Now I feel like the conversations are so identity driven and less
Okay.
actual like things that are happening to bodies driven. Despite the fact that the thing that my friends and I are all talking about, obviously, is okay, when's the last time you got your period? Which patch do you have? Do you take a bath at night with the patch? Like, are
Well,
you
that I can
sleeping?
answer.
How hot are you? And what other supplements are you on? Right? Like those are
Yeah.
the conversations we're having far more of. Which I do feel like we've kept so many things a secret for so long. And I felt that way when I was pregnant for the first time, when I was in like this homicidal rage all the time, and no one told me how miserable I was going to be. And I finally said to my girlfriend, I'm like, why didn't you tell me? She said, because I was so embarrassed to tell you. I didn't want to admit it. I said, but this would have been so helpful. It would have been so helpful to know that some people just hate everyone, including hating pregnancy. That would have saved
Oh
a
my.
lot of anxiety.
Yeah, I think especially since you have experience in relationships and that category, what I think I see the most of, other than sexual pain, which is usually fixable in with medical sex therapy, if you will, but is, relationship boredom, especially even in couples that are happy or claim to be happy, but they've been together a very long time. Or the whole, I went on Facebook and found an old partner, and now suddenly I have more feelings. Like, how do you deal with things of that nature with your perspective and background? Because I'm sure you get queried about this.
Yeah, and
And
it's
I want to add that because the definition of a relationship and the population that you speak to feels to be like a moving target. I'm
Yeah.
dating myself, but there was never like the moment where you said you were boyfriend and girlfriend. You just started as boyfriend and girlfriend. Now there's steps that you go through, or a process or a time period to get to that. So what are they even saying about relationships? And so I wanted to ask you this in the context of, you were on a show for a number of years, and I want
oh,
you to tell us the title. And it seems to me a great microcosm of sort of where we've stopped understanding how this dynamic actually even works.
so I
So
think you want me to say that I was on a show called Married at First Sight. Not as one of the brides, but as one of the experts matching other people to get married to a stranger based on science. The interesting thing is I was tasked on that show with everything pertaining to obviously sexuality and attraction and relationship role models and like values things, which is great. That's right up my alley. What I always found so surprising, and now I was on seasons 1 through 3, so they're way ahead now. I haven't seen it since I left, admittedly. Um, but people wound up coming in with like a laundry list of the things that they needed or wanted. And the things were, I mean, hair color, that would have been easy. It was like eye color, it was like height range. It was ridiculous, ridiculous things, to the point where you ask someone, oh, these are your non-negotiables? Like it's the height. If someone does not match this but has everything else, it's a non-starter for you. So I think people's expectations of what a good
Yeah.
partnership looks like is completely skewed. Completely skewed. Like I don't. It's crazy, and I think that some of it has to do with the swipe factor. We, when I was in the dating world 100 years ago, I didn't know all the other people who existed because I did not see them. They didn't show up on this thing that I kept by my bedside. It was the people I met or who introduced me. So very, very different. But the idea of a relationship, when you ask them, when you ask young people, and I love to do this, what is a relationship? They're like dating or marriage. I said, what about the like connection between two human beings? That is a relationship. Relationships don't have to be capital R relationships. But it is also okay to want a relationship, and there's no shame in saying I want one. Also, no shame in saying I want certain things, but I don't want a relationship too. But they don't necessarily have the language for that because they're modeling what they see, whatever entertainment they find, and they're not really having in those shows. I mean, take pornography out of it for a second. Thoughtful, nuanced conversations about how to talk about feelings and desires and relationship structure. They just make assumptions and cross their fingers that someone is going to figure it out. I don't know about you, but no one has ever mind read anything in my life ever.
Yeah, we talk
Well,
about mind reading all the time with menopause and, even sexual conversations. I know I'm often suggesting to my female patients that if they have a male partner, they may not be able to read their mind about what they now like or
Right.
don't like or
Nice.
that type of thing. So,
this is so different than what we usually talk about. I
yeah,
love hearing
super fun.
both of you are on the front lines. You're actually speaking to people. You're not delivering care, but you are seeing what people are concerned about. And I think there's so much of what you have to do where you have to provide whatever real information is. There's like such a lack of clarity on what is real and what isn't, what is
So
science
much.
and what isn't. And
So much.
Alyssa, you've been having these conversations for 30 years. And, both of you could do sociological studies about how
Well,
sexuality has changed in the
I have
length
to
of time you've been in
say,
this practice.
this has evolved over time. When I first started out in practice, again, it's a while back, sexual conversations were about contraception and STDs. That was it. And I would provide whatever education, the young mind would stay patient for. But now it really has evolved. I think talking about sex is a much more acceptable situation and less taboo. And so this is a good thing. I think we've made progress.
We have. I wonder if sometimes we're far more comfortable, and I'm thinking as we get older, talking about like the big provocative things and less comfortable talking about the everyday things because those feel more personal. We could talk about the
Yeah.
provocative things and have people assume we're talking about everyone else, but us. There is still so much that I think people don't understand about their own bodies, about pleasure, about function. I crack up hysterically every time I see that old teen comedy, film genre where everyone is getting shit-faced in the hopes of getting laid. And I keep telling my students, do you think it's pleasurable or possible to either get an erection or have an orgasm or even come close or lubricate well if you are drinking that much alcohol? Like, just think about that for a moment.
The biology doesn't work.
Yeah. The
I,
drink first, think later. That's the old adage
But we don't
for
even
them.
talk about that.
it's always so much fun to talk to you and to see you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love your candor, and you're not at all reluctant. You'll run right into the fire, and you are
Yeah.
having these important conversations. So I think the
Yeah.
parents of these young people who you've had the opportunity to teach are luckier than a lot of other parents who didn't want to have the conversation themselves, and there's not a Logan coming into their kid's classroom.
Well,
Well,
thank you
you
very
have
much.
absolutely. I mean, if there is no normal, at least you're normalizing what they're talking about. So I think that's terrific.
Well, I will just make one plea for anyone who's like remotely close to raising a young person who's listening. I love the conversations that I have with parents and caregivers. I'm in a classroom for a tiny, like minuscule, barely existent fraction of a young person's life, whole life. These are conversations we're supposed to be having at home. And those conversations aren't just about opening the door to questions when we have them, but they're also modeling how to have conversations about bodies and function and growing up and feelings. And if we don't do that when they're young, they become adults incapable of doing that too. So there's a multi-generational fact I think that we forget about.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.